So thank you so much for joining us today for Prioritization Standards for CoC program-funded rapid rehousing projects. The first thing I want to do is thank you all for rescheduling. I got knocked on my tuchus last week by a bout of the flu after coming back from National Alliance to End Homelessness. If you hear me hoarse cough, it's not because I took up smoking, it's because I'm still trying to get over the upper respiratory infection that I have as well. So again, thank you so much for rescheduling. I know it was really short notice and I really appreciate you all being flexible, and I'm really sorry for any inconveniences it may have caused. On that note, I want to thank you all for joining us today. As you know, I'm pretty flexible with how I do presentations, so as we go through this, if you have any questions, please either raise your hand, chat, or ask a question so that we can make sure that you have as firm of understanding as possible about what the prioritization standards are and what it will require of you practically on the ground. Today, we have two speakers. So one is myself, Sophia Checa. I am now the Assistant Director of the Balance of State Continuum of Care. And we also have Victoria Lopez, who is actually, Victoria, I don't think I know your true title.
I'm one of the HMIS help desk specialists.
HMIS, not just. She is one of the HMIS support staff, and she and I work a lot on coordinated entry, and she is fantastic. So before I go too far into this, I really tried to weed out people who aren't supposed to be on this call. I didn't want it to be confusing for them, and I also didn't want it to be confusing for you guys when they ask questions. So the only people that need to be on this call are people that manage or work under as direct line staff at any of these agencies and for any of these projects. So again, this is just for continuum of care program funded rapid rehousing projects. This isn't for any rapid rehousing projects funded under ESG. It isn't for any tenant-based rental assistance or TBRA programs funded under home or under home, for example. So I just want to make sure that we have the correct people on the call. If you do not represent any of these entities, and for City of Texarkana, sorry I didn't extend the table. This also includes their subrecipients. So Texarkana Friendship Center and Randy Sams, and Jennifer, I see that you're on here. So anybody that represents a CoC program funded rapid rehousing project should be on this call. I don't see a mass exodus of anybody, so I hope that the correct people are on the call. Excuse me. I also wanted to give you an idea of where everybody's coming from. So we're all across the state. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. So how this is going to go down is we're going to do a little background on prioritization. Then we'll talk about the prioritization regulation, which I have included in the handouts on your widget. So you should be able to download it. And then we'll go through how this will look practically on the ground, both for DV providers. So you guys will be using basically Excel spreadsheet. And then for anybody that has to use HMIS, so anybody that is not a DV project, how you will be doing this process in HMIS. And then we'll finish it up. So prioritization, right? We all have an idea of what prioritization is. And the essence of prioritization is to arrange or list a group of things in order of priority of importance. So HUD in the last several years, and I would say since about 2014, has really been pushing home with this. And they started it with the prioritization standard for permanent supportive housing projects funded by the Continuum of Care program. And the reason that they did this is that at the time there were a lot of permanent supportive housing units, but not a lot of them were dedicated to the chronically homeless, which studies have shown permanent supportive housing best serves people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. And so in 2014-2015, HUD released the first notice around prioritization, really really providing that background, right? That we have for a very long time not truly been serving the hardest to serve. And so that HUD had to do something to kind of stack, like, for lack of a better word, had to do something to incentivize communities to start serving people according to the appropriate intervention. So what this means in practice is that we are prioritizing people who need the assistance most for our limited resources. So as you guys know, we have very limited resources across the balance of state, but also in individual communities. And so we're trying to prioritize that assistance to the people that we match to that assistance using a common assessment tool, and those people that need it the most. So we're prioritizing the people that need that assistance the most. This is really representative of how a hospital or an ER system works. So as you guys know, ERs have very limited resources in terms of doctors and nurses and beds. And so what they do is they have a triage system for their resources. So if I came in with a heart attack, but you have been waiting to get your arm in a sling for 5 hours, I'm going to take precedent over your broken arm. And the reason for that is that in an emergency room, right, they're trying to avoid death at all possible. So the people who most need assistance will get that assistance first. And so that's the way you can think about prioritization, especially in the context of the balance of state, is that with the VI SPDAT, we're assessing people to find out what their acuity is or their likelihood of dying on the streets, and we're prioritizing people based off of that acuity score and other characteristics. So why is prioritization important? So what we found through various studies is that actually most people that experience homelessness only experience it once and for a very short period of time. Noted researcher Dennis Culhane did a piece in 2015 that found that about 80% of people experience episodic homelessness, which means that they may need to be in shelter for about 30 days or so, but they can often either self-resolve or resolve using very limited resources, and that it's about 20% of people who experience homelessness that are actually more of this like intractable homelessness or this more chronic homelessness. Every community has limited resources. So there is not a community in this country that I would say has affordable housing. If they did, I feel I would move there. But every community has limited resources. So since I'm looking at the questions and since I see Jennifer Laurent, I know have been working there on coordinated entry for a while. And in Texarkana, they don't have permanent supportive housing, right? They have rapid rehousing, and they also have an emergency shelter. But I think that they would also argue that the resources that they do have, and while they do have some resources, isn't really enough to meet the need that presents in their community. And I think a lot of you guys would agree with that anecdote, that you see a lot bigger need than the supply of resources that you have available. Additionally, the most vulnerable are the most likely to die on the streets. So if you're assessing with the VI SPDAT, which the VI SPDAT is the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool, which is a combination of the VI, which is the Vulnerability Index, which was designed off of a study by, I can't remember his name, but he was a doctor that looked at the health risks of people on the streets and who was most likely to die. And the SPDAT, which is a case management tool, but it looks at people's risk factors of housing stability across different domains. And so what they ultimately found is that the more vulnerable you are or the higher you score, the more likely you are to die on the streets. And I know that we've had a lot of people in the last several years die on the streets in our community and in the balance of state. Additionally, it costs more to manage homelessness than to end homelessness. Actually, there was a study that came out last week that again proved this point. So we're seeing study after study that it just costs more for us to keep people in shelter than it is to house people. And then ultimately, we have examples of communities across the country that have done prioritization and have found success. So we are building off of that momentum and implementing that in the balance of state John just asked, can you share the link or point us in the direction of that study? Yes, John, I can. I actually think I retweeted it, so I will look for that. And then actually, I have one other reason. I didn't put it on here because I even hate having to bring it up, is that HUD requires it. So HUD requires us meaning the balance of state or the continuum of care, to develop prioritization standards for projects that are funded by the continuum of care program. HUD has done the work for us with permanent supportive housing. They have not done that for us with rapid rehousing. So when I go through the requirement, I actually built in a lot of the research that we use, and it's not a lot, to make the argument for why we prioritize how we prioritized. And a lot of it is based off of things that HUD has said in the last, again, 3 years. So ultimately, HUD requires it, and it's something that we're finally coming around to doing. That being said, this is our first stab at this. Like I talked to you guys a lot about continuous improvement, and so we have no intention that this is going to be the final prioritization standards for rapid rehousing. In the next year, what we will do is revisit this. And see, do we need to break this out according to subpopulation? What do we need to do to make rapid rehousing prioritization better across such a large geography? So I want you guys to keep that in mind, that you're really testing out this for the balance of state and for your projects to see how it works. And then we're going to try to fine tune it as time goes on. So one thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about before we go too much further into this conversation about prioritization are these basic concepts. And the reason that we're having this conversation is that actually HUD talks about the need to distinguish these things in the coordinated entry guidance that they released in January. And I think it's a very important conversation to have. I've seen throughout my time in doing coordinated entry that there's a lot of confusion about when prioritization happens and how it's different than eligibility and how it's different than your target population. And so I'm trying to clear this up as much as I can. So if you have questions, please ask. So your target population, which is something that you guys have to identify in your project application in 3B. So, right, the NOFA is open, so FYI. So your target population represents approximately 75% of the clients that you will be serving in your program. So for example, if I on my 2016 project application indicated that I am going to be serving chronically homeless families, then 75% of the people in my beds or in my case management slots need to represent that target population. And this actually comes from the HIC guidance. So that happens when you decide your target population when you are writing your grant, right? Eligibility requirements are those policies and procedures for determining which households will receive rapid rehousing assistance. So eligibility requirements happen when somebody presents at your agency and asks if we have any housing resources, and then we determine if they're eligible for what we have, right? And I'm talking about the current model, not the CE model, because I think almost all communities on here have not implemented coordinated entry. So the eligibility requirement check is really something that you're doing at your agency. So I'm determining, are these people literally homeless? And that's really only the CoC program funded eligibility requirement. And then prioritization happens once you're ready to take someone into an available unit. So I have identified an opening, and I'm going to prioritize those people who met my eligibility requirements, who right now are waiting on your wait list for resources. You're going to prioritize that list and then take the person with the highest needs, highest level of vulnerability off of that list. Does that make sense? Sorta. Z, do you have any questions about that? Excuse me. Okay, so if you have any questions once you make sense of it in your head, let me know. So these happen at 3 different times. That's just the point that I want to make clear. These happen at 3 different times. It doesn't all happen at the same time. Okay? Another way that I wanted to show this to you guys is basically what you're doing to the population of people as you go through this process. So, excuse me. Okay, Alice says, it makes sense to me. Good. Great, Alice. Thank you for your feedback. So at the bottom, you have all people experiencing homelessness. So at the bottom, you have all people experiencing homelessness. So the next step, right, is if I apply a target population, I am effectively narrowing that population of people. So it's going from all people experiencing homelessness to maybe just DV survivors, right? So in the case of families in crisis, their target population is domestic violence survivors. And so their target population is going from all people experiencing homelessness to just people who are fleeing or attempting to flee DV, right? Then the next step is your eligibility requirements. So if I'm going to continue the case of families in crisis, they're only serving survivors of domestic violence. So when somebody presents, they'll go through their eligibility requirements with that person to determine, do you move on with this process, right? Like, am I going to eventually provide you rapid rehousing assistance because right now you're eligible? And so they further narrow down that population. Prioritization then takes it a step further to further narrow it down to ideally just that individual who is, right, they're experiencing homelessness in your target population, they meet your eligibility requirements and your prioritization standards, right? So ideally what's happening is you're really only just pulling one person off the list, and I'll be excited to hear some feedback from you guys if you find a lot of instances of where people are effectively tying across the board, and that'll make sense in a little bit when I explain the criteria. So again, it's just this narrowing of the population. If you don't have a target population, so that's the case for Texarkana, for example, you guys through rapid rehousing serve everybody, and so this second from the bottom tier would not be there, right? You have all people experiencing homelessness, then you would have people who meet your eligibility requirements, so target population again wouldn't be a thing, and then ultimately you have people who meet your eligibility requirements and then adhere to your prioritization standards. Does this make sense? Ultimately, awesome. Okay, so ultimately what prioritization does, it doesn't mean that you can't serve people. What it's saying is that I am going to serve this person first because they are, the first step is they have the highest service needs, right? So that's how this works. This gives you the objective of prioritization is to make this less of a subjective process. So it's a more objective process, right? You're using data to inform ultimately who is it that I am serving next. I just got panicked that I didn't press record. Okay, any questions? Excuse me. Okay, next slide. So rapid rehousing prioritization. So everybody go into your handouts. I have a little note for myself. Review the prioritization standards. So everybody go into the handouts of your widget and you can download the prioritization standards. I'm going to pull them up. And we are going to review this. Has anybody, I don't think anybody, oh, actually, I did actually include them in the emails that went out. So has anybody reviewed this prior to the webinar? Awesome. Excuse me. Okay. So let's run through this. Or actually, no, I was gonna I was gonna toss it off to John to see if he wanted to review it. Never mind. Okay, so the purpose of this document is to outline the prioritization standards and process for continuum of care funded rapid rehousing projects in the Texas Balance of State continuum of care. So under the history section, I have included everything I could find on how to prioritize for rapid rehousing. So as you can see, it's not a lot. It was actually really hard to find information, and it was included in bits and pieces of different snaps and focus articles that have gone out from HUD, or the policy brief that they released on coordinated entry. So there's not a lot about it, and I think people are just starting to do it more and more because of coordinated entry, and people are really just starting somewhere with this process. So I'm just gonna really quickly summarize. So in essence, through these snaps and focus and through the coordinated entry policy brief, HUD has been really clear that through prioritization, they want us to prioritize people with the most challenges. So people who are most vulnerable. Michelle just asked a question. I'm going to read that when I'm done with this, Michelle, and get back to you. So essentially what this is saying is HUD, regardless of the project type, really wants us to prioritize people with the most severe service needs. And they want us to make sure that we're making sure that our very limited resources are going to the people that need them most. That's really what they're saying. I don't know what this is. So what we propose to the board is that we want to prioritize people in the balance of state for CoC program funded rapid rehousing projects that meet the following criteria. One, that they have the highest service needs, and highest service needs is determined by the total score on the VI SPDAT or the FVI SPDAT. That the household is sleeping in an unsheltered sleeping location. That the household has the longest history of homelessness. And lastly, that the household with the earliest enrollment date in HMIS or an HMIS comparable database. So what we're getting at with that data element, and again, we are going to revisit these in a year, but what we're getting at with that is that we want to target the person, and that's the final tiebreaker, but we want to target the person who has been involved in the system the longest. Victoria is actually going to go over which enrollment dates we mean by this. So we don't mean homelessness prevention. We mean truly things like emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and coordinated entry. Correct me if there are any other, Victoria. We're also not including supportive services only. So it's really just involvement in any of these homeless services housing interventions.
I have street outreach also included.
Street outreach. Thank you. I knew I was forgetting something. So street outreach. So what you'll see, so that's the criteria, right? We're going to prioritize based off of these 4 things. Under the procedure section will be particularly helpful for you guys. So we're only doing this with people that score between 4 and 7 on the VI SPDAT and 4 and 8 on the FVI SPDAT. Why is that the case? Anybody? So if you score between a 4 and 7 on the VI SPDAT or a 4 and 8 on the FVI SPDAT, that is the score range for rapid rehousing, right? So your intervention is rapid rehousing. We're only doing this process with people that have a total score of between 4 and 7 and 4 and 8, with the caveat for people that score for PSH and they opt for a referral to rapid rehousing. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So what'll happen is either by using the housing priority list or the project referral functionality in HMIS, and for DV providers, it'll be using just the glorified Excel spreadsheet. The first thing that you're going to look at is the VI SPDAT or FVI SPDAT score. So that's the first criteria that we're scoring on. If, for example, I have 10 people on that list and 5 of them all receive an 8, then I'm going to move on to the next criteria, which is people sleeping in an unsheltered location. So on the VI SPEDAT and the FVI SPEDAT, it's question 1 on the VI SPEDAT and question 5 on the FVI SPEDAT. So of my 5 people who scored an 8, 3 of them sleep in an unsheltered location. So that means I need to continue on to the next criteria. And the next criteria is people who have been homeless the longest. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the length of time homelessness based on question 2 of the VI SPEDAT and 6 of the FVI SPEDAT, and I'll show you guys that in a second. And you're going to apply that criteria. So of my 3 people who had an 8, who were sleeping in an unsheltered sleeping location, one of them has been one has been experiencing homelessness for 2 years. And the other 2 have been experiencing homelessness for 6 months and 4 months. In that scenario, therefore, the person that I will be calling about an available space in our rapid rehousing project is the person that scored an 8, that is sleeping in an unsheltered sleeping location, and who has been homeless for 2 years. Does that make sense to everybody? And I will be sending out the VI SPEDAT and the FVI SPEDAT after. Excuse me. So you'll see here, question 5 is where do you and your family sleep most frequently? Outdoors. How long has it been since you and your family lived in permanent stable housing? And that was the FVI SPEDAT. For the VI SPEDAT, it's where do you sleep most frequently? I sleep outdoors. And then how long has it been since you lived in permanent stable housing? The good news is for those of you that use HMIS, the housing priority list, as Victoria will show you later, has all of this already built in for you. So the process is relatively easy. You just have to export to Excel and filter. For CoC program funded rapid rehousing projects managed by a domestic violence provider, you'll have to do this process on paper and then input just those few data elements into, again, the glorified Excel spreadsheet. Does that make sense to everybody? I will definitely be emailing you that. It'll be included in the follow-up email. So Rebecca asked, would you happen to have the Excel spreadsheet to email as well? Yes. And actually, I'm going to show it to you guys in a little bit, just so you're not flying blind. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so John just asked something, and it's, okay, so do we need to make and document 5 attempts over 5 days, over 5 consecutive days to contact and enroll the next eligible household in our rapid rehousing projects based on the prioritization standards? So actually that's based on the coordinated entry standards. We would like that, but if coordinated entry is not implemented right now, you do not have to. I hope that, yeah, okay. It's really hot in my office. Are the values, so Rebecca asked, are the values different on the new forms? We have a couple over 8. So no, Rebecca. So the people that you have scoring over 8 are those people that are scoring for permanent supportive housing. So the VI SPEDAT has always scored on like a 0 to 20 range. So we're just talking about people that score within rapid rehousing. However, this is a great segue. Before I get into that. So lastly, right, if I had 2 people that had been homeless for 2 years, I would move on to the next final tiebreaker, which is identifying the person that has been involved with the system the longest, right? And you'll see the example here. I tried to include an example similar to the one that we just worked through. There is an exception to this. In a lot, like I mentioned, in a lot of communities, we don't have PSH. And so What we're allowing for both through coordinated entry and through prioritization is that people that score within the PSH range, so for the FBI SPDAT, it's 9 plus, and for the VI SPDAT, it's 8 plus. Through coordinated entry, we are allowing people the choice to go into a lower intervention. So what that means is if somebody, let's say I'm getting assessed through coordinated entry and I scored a 19, they could tell me we don't have PSH, we have rapid rehousing. This is what rapid rehousing is. It's intended for people with lower acuity. However, because we don't have PSH, it could be made available to you. And that person could opt for a referral to a rapid rehousing project. So I wanted to include this so you guys aren't surprised if you see anybody with like a 12 on your referral list when coordinated entry is implemented. We didn't want to set a strict standard about how many chronically homeless clients you had to take in because every agency is completely different. So your capacity is very different. And I mean, how many case managers you have, how many beds you have, how many total people you're proposing on serving, how much funding you have. And so the only guidance I have for you guys on taking chronically homeless clients is that you need to take all of that into account before you accept a chronically homeless client into your project. So John, that kind of speaks to your question about a lot of chronically homeless people in your project. And actually, we're making that caveat because of you guys. So while we want this resource to go to people who need it the most, we also do not want to we also don't want your projects to be filled with a lot of people where a more intense intervention is more appropriate. Does that make sense? So how many chronically homeless clients you accept into your rapid rehousing is really dependent on a lot of things. We would argue that you should probably be taking those people who have been chronically homeless right? They've been in your shelter system or in your system for a very, very long time. Like those are the exceptions that you should be accepting into your project. As this comes up, y'all, please feel free to contact us. Because we don't have like a guideline, which is like 1 in 5 people has to be chronically homeless. If you need somebody to talk this through with, we are here for you. We're a team. We're here to walk this through with you guys in order for you to make a very informed decision about your project and about your clients as well. So does that make sense? I wish I would prefer to be more black and white with this, but unfortunately it's a gray area right now. And so what'll happen on your priority list is if you have somebody who scores a 12, but right now you determine that we can't take that score right now because we already have 3 other chronically homeless people in your project. Chronically homeless people in your project. Sorry, there's always a pause when I'm reading questions that come in. And I forgot what I was saying. Anyway, hopefully I remember. So what John asked is, just so I'm clear, we won't be penalized if we only take in PSH households. I don't think so, but that's something that I actually need to clear with Cameron. I don't know if our intention is that for you guys to fill your entire project with people who score for PSH because you still have a rapid rehousing need in your community. So to be honest, John, I don't know how we're going to work that on the back end. Can you actually send an email? Oh, if we don't only wait, sorry. We won't be penalized if we don't only take no. Okay, sorry. Thank you for capitalizing the don't. So what John is asking is if we take people who score both rapid and PSH, are we going to get penalized? No. How you'll get penalized is if you take households that score between 0 and 3. because those households should be diverted from your system. Those households arguably do not need rapid rehousing right now. So you should be taking anybody that scores 4 and higher with, ideally they're falling within that rapid rehousing range, and you may have a household or two that falls within the PSH range. Does that make sense? And I'm sorry if that caused any confusion. It's okay, John. Reading sometimes is hard. So, and I just remembered what I was saying before that when I read your question. So again, if you opt right now that like a client who is experiencing chronic homelessness, you already have 3 people in your project that over the course of the year you need to serve 55, or let's say 12. You need to serve a total of 12 clients. You have 12 available units, and 3 of them are filled by chronically homeless folks. What'll happen is you'll just move on. So you'll look for people within the rapid rehousing range that scored the highest. So you'll move past that chronically homeless total number and you'll move, or the PSH total number, and you'll move into the diversion range, or into the rapid rehousing range. Holly asks, is there going to be a different scoring for DV? All of ours will be DV. So Holly, no. For right now, we're just going to work on this. But like I said, this is baseline. This is our first attempt at this, and this is something that we will be soliciting feedback from you guys, especially based on your different subpopulations, and we'll be working on next year when we evaluate this procedure. Does that make sense? Does this make sense to everybody? I feel like I make sense like 100 times in a webinar, and I really am sorry for that. Yes, Michelle. So if families are residing in a DV shelter, they automatically are not considered sleeping in an unsheltered sleeping location. So, I think what you would have to do in that instance, Michelle, is if you have nobody that's sleeping outdoors, you would move on. So, right, you have everybody that indicates that they're sleeping in a shelter and nobody's sleeping outdoors, you would move on to that next value. So you would determine who has been homeless the longest. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. She says yes, thanks. Okay, so I will be making this available in the follow-up email if anybody has any questions about that. The VI SPDAT, the FVI SPDAT will be there, and so will the DV. So will the DV spreadsheet. So, the process. Sorry, Excel spreadsheet. Thank you, Rebecca. So the process, how it'll work for you guys, so if you're a DV provider, is that you'll use the paper VI SPDAT or FVI SPDAT. So the VI SPDAT is intended for single person households or for households without children. And then the FVI SPDAT is intended for households with children. And you're going to use the DV master list, or actually, sorry, should be housing priority list. I did this in my six state, so housing priority list. So what that's going to look like I said, it's really basic. I try to keep it as basic as possible. These 2 fields are more for you guys, or 3 fields. I didn't know how or whether or not you wanted to include identifiable information on here. So I have that just for you guys. If we ever ask to see these, you're going to have to make a copy of this form and then remove those fields. So just please know that. You're going to have, sorry, this doesn't need to be here. So you're going to have your comparable database ID number. This is just, if you're using Osnium, you'll put the ID number the person gets when they're entered into the system. Housing list status is whether or not the household has been housed. So you'll just put housed if they're housed and it'll be blank otherwise. Date assessed with the VI SPDAT or FVI SPDAT is the date they were assessed. And then you'll see that you'll go through these 4 criteria. So you'll have your assessment score, your sleeping location, your length of time homeless, and then the earliest date of interaction with the system. And actually, since you guys are on here, and Cameron and I didn't know the answer to this and didn't have time to contact the Texas Council on Family Violence, but are you guys able to see historical information for clients within OSNIUM? Or are you only able to see the data that you yourself enter? And what I mean by historical information is if anybody accessed another DV shelter anywhere else in Texas that DV shelter also happens to be using, okay, HMIS. So just what you enter. So you guys would use the earliest interaction date with that household. Okay, we were erring on the fact that you guys could just see what you enter because that's what makes sense. So I'm glad to see that's the case. So you guys will go back and just see what's the earliest interaction date you've had with this client. And then this form has built-in formula, so it'll show you how long it was since the client was assessed and since they got put into housing. Any questions? Again, really simple. We're actually working with TCFV on getting these data elements into OSNIUM so that you can just use OSNIUM just like the other providers use HMIS. So we are working with them on this. I want you guys to know that. It's with everything else we have on our plates in with the NOFA dropping on Friday, we're working on it. And I just got my login information for OSNIUM. Yeah, Rebecca, Rebecca says this new form looks a little easier to use and navigate, less info to input. So Rebecca, I really tried to be really intentional about just having the information you need to do prioritization here because you're entering everything for them anyway into OSNIUM. So you could just, if we needed aggregate reports, you could pull that for us. No problem. Any questions from DV providers about this? And I want to speak to when you do the VI SPDAT. So the intention is that not that you do that right away with clients. The intention is that once you all, as a partnership, determine when housing is appropriate and is a need, then you would do the VI SPDAT and the FVI SPDAT. Does that make sense? Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, so non-DV providers, so again, DV providers are doing this process because they're statutorily, DV providers are statutorily prohibited from entering information into HMIS. So Victoria is going to show the process for non-DV providers using HMIS. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Victoria.
Okay. Show my screen. All right, you guys let me know if you can see my screen and can hear me. So I'm going to walk through very quickly how this is going to look practically in HMIS, and I'm going to start at like square zero. So some of you are already familiar with where to find the VI SPDAT and how it looks in HMIS, but I do want to touch on that just to make sure that everyone who is going to be doing this in HMIS is on the same page. So I am in the training site right now, and I'm on one of my dummy clients. If you look under assessments and you just hover over the assessments menu option, you should see a menu option called VI SPDAT history. this is where you'll be able to add VI SPDATs to your client. You should see that we have two options here: add new VI SPDAT assessment and add new family VI SPDAT assessment. For this example, I'm just going to click on the add new VI SPDAT assessment. My client is on their own, they're a single adult. And the way that the VI SPDAT is in HMIS should look fairly similar to what you see on the paper version of this assessment. And I do want to point out a couple of things to keep an eye out for. So each of these red boxes is going to score the section that's above it. Here's that question number 1, where do you sleep most frequently? And you have shelter, transitional housing, safe havens, outdoors. So if I were to click on outdoors, you should see that the score tallies up on its own. So that should save you some time. I'm just going to click on a couple of extra boxes here so we can take a look at the very bottom of the assessment. So at the bottom of the assessment, we have the main scoring section, and it will tally up your client's grand total based on what they scored in each individual section. And on the right-hand side of that box is the results. So that'll give you the recommended housing intervention. So right now we're focusing on 4 through 7 or 4 through 8 for your family VI SPDAT. I'm going to click on Save on the bottom right. And this is what you should see once your client's VI SPDAT score has been saved. So if it doesn't look like this, it either did not save correctly, or maybe you want to get in touch. That might have been a glitch, but you should see the type of what that VI SPDAT is. So we just completed the VI SPDAT, so it says single adults. If we had completed a family VI SPDAT, this should say family. On the far right-hand side is where you'll see the score total. And then each of these individual columns is a breakdown of each section. Any questions on just the process of adding VI SPDATs to your clients? All right, hopefully that's a straightforward process. Now I want to go into the housing priority list. That's going to be found on the home workspace. So right now we're in the client's workspace. I'm going to go ahead and click on that workspace button and click on home. You should see in your main menu panel on the left-hand side, we have two housing priority list options, one for rapid rehousing and the other for PSH. So if your client score in that rapid rehousing range, they will appear on the housing priority list for rapid rehousing. We have a lot of different criteria that you can use to search for. Right now, the only thing that's required is the assessing organization. So if you want to look at just the VI SPDATs that you have done, you would just click on your agency and then search. So right now we're in the training site and I'm under Texas Homeless Network. So I'm going to click on Texas Homeless Network and search. And it's going to pull up all of the VI SPDATs that fall within that range that we created. You'll see that the one that we just did doesn't show up because they scored a 3. So they're not going to appear on this list here. On the far right, or on the right-hand side, is where we have things like the VI SPDAT score total. You have the years homeless, the earliest shelter housing date. So this is that earliest date on whether they, were in emergency shelter or rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, or street outreach. And then you have the sleeping location for your single VI SPDATs and for your family VI SPDATs. Unfortunately, I had to put those in 2 different columns because they save in 2 different places in the system, but this is just where you would keep an eye out for those. And we're in the training site, so not many people have that filled out, but you would see what that would look like. We have 2 different options when it comes to exporting this list. And another thing I want to point out is you will only export what you see on this page. So for example, if you just click on your agency, that's your agency's data is the only thing that's going to export. So just keep that in mind. we have two options, Excel export and Excel data export. My little GoToMeeting widget is in my way. Excel export and Excel data export. You might be asking, well, what's the difference between either of those? And there is a slight difference that I want to go over. So if you click on Excel export, what you will actually be downloading is an Excel spreadsheet that looks exactly like this. And you'll see that it actually exported all of the fields that you saw on the housing priority list. So we have your assessing org, we have the client's name. Over here, we have the VI SPDAT score and the years homeless. So that looks to be pretty good. The Excel data export is slightly different. For one, it downloads a lot more data. There are a lot of extra columns for this particular export. And the reason for that is because on the original housing priority list, let me go back to this, you'll see that there are some things that just aren't here on the list. Like you can search for client ID, but the client ID isn't actually here on the list. Same for veteran status. You can search for veteran status and it does work, but you don't see this on the list here. Part of that is because of space reasons. We have a lot of data here on this list, and just for reasons of space, it was easier to take some of these fields off. So the regular Excel export will only export what you literally see on the list. The Excel data export, however, will give you things like the veteran status. One thing to watch out for, though, is that some of these will be in what I call computer code or binary code. So 0 would be a no and 1 would be a yes. If you have any questions about what some of these numbers might represent, just get in touch and I can send you the list of what those might be. Now, I'm going to use the Excel data export here, or excuse me, just the regular Excel export here to show you how to set filters, because once you actually get the data, you actually have to manipulate it a little bit so you can see things in the way that you would prioritize them. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. The easiest way for me is if I just highlight the row, the very top one, and then press either Control-Shift-L on my keyboard, and I get little filters at the top of my header column there, or header row. So if you wanted to, you could then say, well, I only want to see those who scored a 7 because they're the highest. And it filters that way. You can sort multiple filters at once, and I think that's probably going to be easier for you guys because then you can do the first criteria, which is the score, and then you can do the second criteria, which is the sleeping location, and then you can look at the years homeless, right? So let me just remove the filters here, and now I'm in Excel 2013. You might be using a different version of Excel, but you'll be able to find this in the exact same way, and that would be in the data section. We have this one section called Sort and Filter. We just looked at how to set filters. So this is another way that you can set a filter on that top row if you needed to. But we're going to look at Sort now. And we're going to expand the selection so that it includes everything, right? And it's going to ask us, do you want to search by a specific column? And we're going to say, yeah, we want to search by the VI SPDAT score. And we want to see the ones that's largest to smallest. We can also add a level. Maybe we want to see where are we? Sleeping location for either the single or the family. I don't have too much data in there right now, so I think it would be easier for this example to sort by years homeless. And we want to see those who have the largest years homeless. So I'm going to select OK. I'm just going to rearrange the list here. And you'll see at the very top of the list, I'm going to kind of make this a little larger here. At the very top of the list, it's sorted so that we see that Michael Cheka has a score of 7, and he's also been homeless for 3 years. So this might be someone that we want to prioritize over the other clients. And we can look at his sleeping location. It says a 12. I know that off the top of my head, that means he was in shelter. And our other client who has been homeless for 2 years, well, he doesn't even have that sleeping location filled out. Any questions on how to set filters? It's kind of a crash course on setting filters in Excel.
Victoria, you're blowing John Cooper's mind.
Good. That is that's kind of what I'm here for. Not for John Cooper specifically, but like for everyone. I'm here to blow your guys' minds. So yeah, so I would encourage you, if you have already been doing VI SPDATs for your clients, just go ahead and download that information and sort of play with the filters, right? You don't actually have to use that first set of data to prioritize, but just get a sense of what it feels like to set filters, you know, to sort the data in a specific way, just to see how that works for you. It might take, if you're not used to doing this kind of work, it might take a little extra practice, but I think that, you know, manipulating your data and getting really hands-on with your data in this way is going to be really beneficial to you.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Victoria? Rebecca also said thank you for the tutorial, that her copy of Excel was locked by the sender, so this will be really helpful. So
okay.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, it's amazing what Excel can do. So I'm glad that you guys learned something new. Anybody who uses HMIS have any questions about how this is going to go down? And I know well, it's almost 2, but we're almost done. John, I always learn a lot on these webinars. Good, that's our aim. So I'm going to steal this back from you, Victoria. Thank you so much. If you want, you can stick around or you can sign off. But I appreciate your help.
No problem.
Okay. So deadline for this process is August 1st, 2017. So what I mean by that is any availabilities that you guys have starting August 1st, 2017, you have to use the prioritization standards in order to determine who will fill that availability. Is that crystal clear? Okay. So a few what ifs, because we always get these, so I want to make sure that I covered at least the 2 that I could come up with. For DVs as well. So for everybody who is CoC program funded, who receives who has a CoC program funded rapid rehousing project, everybody has to start this process, including DV providers. You guys will just start outside of Osmium or your comparable system for the time being. You'll use that Excel spreadsheet. So if you have a wait list, so this came up a lot last time. So there's a lot of people that have existing wait lists. You have to complete the VI SPDATs with people on your wait list to make sure that the people on your wait list are adhering to the prioritization standards. That's just, it is what it is. So if they score a 0 and between a 0 and 3 and they're on your list, you have to attempt a version with them. If they score between 4 and 7 and 4 and 8, they've matched for rapid rehousing, and so they'll be included in the rapid rehousing prioritization. And if they score 8+ on the VI SPDAT or 9+ on the FVI SPDAT, they've matched to PSH, and they may, if they want, receive a referral to rapid rehousing. You just need to be very transparent with them that you don't know when they will be served, right? Like it's going to take time to get served. And since they have higher needs, you need to make sure that you have the capacity for that. So Michelle's asking, so we use the FVI SPDAT along with the prioritization standards you referenced. So you use the FVI SPDAT to inform the prioritization standards I referenced. Does that make sense? So you have to do the FVI SPDAT in order to get the total score, which is the service need, right? In order to get where the person was sleeping, in order to get how long they've been homeless. That's what you're getting from that assessment tool. The way that Families in Crisis does it, Michelle and Rebecca, I'm going to share the little conversation that we had, is that they offer the FVI spit out or the VI spit out to whoever. Oh, you work together. Okay, awesome. Never mind. So John is asking, does this mean we do the VI spit out again with an individual when they come up on the list? Can you, yeah, so, well, sorry, hold on. I'm trying to process and ask a clarifying question. So is what you are saying, John, that if somebody has already been assessed with the VI spit out, do I need to assess them again before I give them an available unit? So no, you don't have to, unless during intake, and this kind of ties in with the CE written standards, unless during intake you find out a lot more information which you think could put them in a higher chronicity. So it could put them in the PSH range. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I mean about a wait list, John, is, right, you guys have been operating right now. If you're at capacity, you may have people that come in every day who are eligible for your project, so you keep their information in case you have an opening and you'll contact them. That's what I mean by your wait list. So if you have an existing wait list or a list of people who are at that time eligible for that project, and you haven't done the VI spit out with them, they have no VI spit out associated with them, they need to have a VI spit out done. Okay, awesome. I said got ya. So the last one, and this is going to apply for a lot of you later on, but your coordinated entry process is operating locally. So I'm describing this process as if coordinated entry is not operating in your community. So as it says here, if coordinated entry is operating, unless your project or agency is operating as an entry point, in which case your agency or your project will be doing the VI spit out with everybody who meets the target population for coordinated entry, right? But unless your project is operating as an entry point, so you're not an entry point, just to clarify. So if your project or agency is not an entry point, you will have to complete the VI spit out Okay. Unless your project, I'm just going to read this. Unless your project or agency is operating as an entry point, you will not need to complete the VI spit out or FVI spit out with clients. Yeah, I was going to say that. Why this is the case is because an entry point will already be doing that for you. Does that make sense? So right now, because you guys do not have entry points into the system doing the coordinated entry assessment, which includes the VI spit out, you have to do them yourselves. But once you have coordinated entry up and running, if you are not an entry, if your agency or project is not an entry point, you won't have to do the VI spit out or the FVI spit out. Okay, and Michelle, that ties into so Michelle says we're an entry point referral from a DV shelter, and that ties into your question that you had earlier. That's something that you have to talk to the DV shelter about, whether or not they want to be the entry point for survivors of domestic violence, and they will ultimately make referrals to you guys. That's something that you have to decide locally. So Holly Bates asked, didn't you and Molly decide that DV shouldn't be the entry point? So what we decided, Holly, is that there's different circumstances across the balance of state. In some community, well, we're encouraging that DV providers become entry points just for victims of domestic violence. So in your situation, since you're the only game in town, that was our concern, is that you shouldn't be the entry point for everybody experiencing homelessness. Does that make sense? Okay. So back to coordinated entry. So again, so unless your project or agency is operating as an entry point, you won't need to complete the VI spit out or FVI spit out with clients. That will have already been done with them as part of coordinated entry. When your project has availability, you apply the prioritization standards and contact the household at the top of the list. So this is a value of coordinated entry, especially if you're not an entry point, is that basically this work is being done for you, right? You're getting referrals that are only appropriate. And by what I mean by that is that you're only getting referrals of people that meet your eligibility requirements. They're going to show up on your housing priority list or your referral list, and you'll be able to apply the prioritization standards to that list. Any questions? And again, this is still rolling out, so this is right now in a lot of communities a hypothetical, and we'll be working more on what it truly means once you guys implement. And I just wanted to show you guys this map. This is what this looks like, right? I'm doing my coordinated entry assessment. That's what that housing barrier assessment is. And then I'm prioritizing before I make referrals into housing. So I just wanted to show you guys what this looks like. Okay, follow up. The webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we're going to break it up between the HMIS portion and then the whole entire thing. If you have questions about prioritization, contact me. And if you have questions about HMIS, contact HMIS. If you have questions about the DV portion, contact me. So Michelle asks, is there a training that could be provided for the DV shelter for the assessment? Yes, Michelle, that's part of coordinated entry. Again, that's part of the larger conversation, but there is training available, and it's actually available online. So quick announcement, and okay. So as you guys know, I meant to put a picture here, but I didn't, so I'm sorry. You're gonna look at this blank screen. But hopefully all of you know that the NOFA dropped 2 weeks ago on Friday. I can't believe it's been, or maybe like a week and almost 2 weeks on Friday. It's been like a week and a half. That means that we've already been in competition mode, but that means that competition mode is ramping up. Haha, John. So just so I wish I could have my notes. So just so you know, the RFP and our mandatory webinar is coming up. We actually have a planning meeting about it tonight. So just stay tuned. That will all go out via the constant contact listserv that we have. Actually, I'm going to move this. So, okay. And then something that Cameron wanted me to say is that we, I believe, have been asking for technical submissions, which is a form C19A that new grants submit to HUD. And you have to do this in order to execute your grants. We have only a few of them. So we're asking that if you have your technical submission, if you've submitted it, to please send an email to texasboscoc@gmail.com and attach that document there. So I'm gonna write that in the chat. Does anybody have any questions about that? I want to be cognizant of time and not go too, I know we're over, but I don't want to go too far over. Okay, it doesn't sound like it. Again, technical submissions are due. We had close of business by last Friday, but I was sick, so please get them in by this Friday by close of business. So any last questions about prioritization? I really hope this was helpful for you guys. Please know that we're here. This is a partnership. Please know that I'm here to help support you guys. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer those questions. If you need additional training, we're here to provide that. So I thank you so much for sticking through this with me, an hour and 15 minutes. I'm sorry that we went over. I really appreciate that, and I will talk to y'all soon. And good luck on the NOFA.
Thanks, guys.